Okay, can everyone see the presentation? Wonderful. All right, now I'll just have to move these controls from out of my way. All right, so good evening, everyone. I hope everyone had a good day. You all know who I am. I am Dana McMullen. And in addition to being the program manager for careers in code, in my former profession, I was an assistive technology professional. And as an assistive technology professional, I served at Syracuse University from 2002 through 2005. And then I went on to Onondaga Community College, and then I was there through 2009. While I was at OCC, I also served for 2 years with the New York State Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I've been a certified technology instructor for individuals who are blind since 2002, and it's work that I really enjoy. So, in talking about web accessibility, you probably know that as a part of our community, being on a website is just another community. It's a digital community. So with a lot of you being new to programming and coding, I'm assuming that you're probably all fairly new to web accessibility. So as a new web developer, your question may be, where do you start? So in an ideal world, in an ideal situation, you would want to hire a full-time accessibility consultant. And this person could make sure that your company stayed in compliance. They would probably be full-time, depending on how large or how small your business was. And they would help you to audit or review your websites for any potential accessibility gaps. So at Syracuse University, they actually have a full-time web compliance officer, and they also have people who work on the websites full-time to make sure that they are in compliance and accessible. But if you have your own business, or if you have a small business, you may not have accessibility measures in place, or even someone in place who could view your websites to test them to see if they're accessible. So the reality is that the person that you have checking for accessibility, this job may go unassigned, or when it comes up, it may be a side project of someone who is already employed within the organization. This means that the person who's assigned as the advocate may not be familiar with the web accessibility guidelines and compliance, and therefore they may not know where to begin. So I'm advising that as a step one, that as new developers, you come somewhat familiar with the laws. And I'm not saying go back to law school or study or anything like that, but just be familiar with what they are. The laws as they stand right now, the first one is called the American Disabilities Act, and I'll talk more about that. The second law that you need to be aware of is called the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And where it concerns electronic communication, you also need to be familiar with what's called the Section 508 Amendment. And then step number two, as a new web developer, make sure you audit your communication. Audit meaning just simply review and make sure that your website is accessible. You want to do regular website accessibility checks and implement any changes necessary to make your website as well as your online PDFs accessible. So step number one regarding the laws, the first one that I mentioned, the American Disabilities Act. So according to the ADA, American with Disabilities, also known as ADA, This act is a civil rights law, and it prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life. This includes jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. And then there's the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This law prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability for all federal agencies and programs that receive federal assistance and all contractors engaged in business with federal agency. This law pertains to employment, education, removal of physical and communication barriers, information communication and technology, also known as ICT, and government procurement. And then there's the Section 508 amendment. This amendment is to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that I just mentioned. And this is the one that deals specifically with electronic communication, such as your websites, email, and electronic documents like PDFs. And this is also known as the Federal Electronic and Information Technology Accessibility and Compliance Act. And I'm sorry, that really was a mouthful. Government agencies, as well as any organization that engages in business or accepts funds from a government agency, must be Section 508 compliant. And we'll talk more about what that means. But first of all, I want to discuss who are the people in your neighborhood. And some of you may know who this guy is. If you know, you can come off of mute and let me know.
Mr. Rogers.
That's Mr. Rogers.
Childhood
Mr. Rogers had a song. Yes, he did. Mr. Rogers had a song called "Who Are the People in Your Neighborhood" that he did at the beginning of all of his shows. And I'm not going to sing it because I don't want to run anyone away. But when it comes to website accessibility, you really need to know who your customers, your consumers, and who your viewers are. Who are the people in your neighborhood? Well, they're your users. They use or consume what you make. Your users include people with disabilities. A user with a disability usually has a condition of the body or mind, condition meaning an impairment, and that makes it more difficult for the person to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. And this world includes digital neighborhoods, and that also includes websites. So there are many different types of disabilities. And those that can affect a person would be their vision, movement, thinking, remembering, learning, communicating, hearing. There's also mental health and social relationships. I've highlighted vision, learning, and communicating because those things are key in a learning environment. And not to say that the rest aren't, but as an assistive technology specialist, the three that I've highlighted are the ones that I dealt with the most in trying to make sure that course material were accessible to college students who came into OCC and Syracuse University with learning disabilities. So sometimes in our neighborhoods, we experience discrimination, and it's never a good thing. And so laws are made so that when folks are discriminated against, if the action is not corrected, those who are party to the discrimination are subject to being sued. So the big question is, who got sued? Well, Domino's Pizza got sued. A Supreme Court handed victory to a blind man who sued Domino's over site accessibility. This consumer wanted to order a pizza and was not able to use their website. Digital accessibility is not limited to just using a website on a laptop or desktop computer. It also covers the realm of your mobile apps. So if you have plans or desires to be a mobile app developer, you also want to be aware of issues and solutions resolving that area of development. And yes, if you've already done some reading ahead, as some of you have already done, you know that even Beyonce got sued. So as fierce as her beehive is, they could not prevent her from having a lawsuit filed against her. The number of lawsuits over inaccessible websites has exploded recently. So in 2018, more than 2,200 lawsuits were filed in federal courts. According to the accessible technology firm UsableNet, and that was just up from 814 lawsuits that were filed in 2017. And I'm not trying to scare you all at all, but having an awareness of what the issues are, especially if you're looking to deal with more high profile clients, having the knowledge of where you need to be as a web developer is only going to protect you. It will protect your any personal business or brand that you're trying to build. It will also protect, help to protect any companies that you work with, having knowledge of what this is. So Domino's even tried to have the court ruling overturned. In their petition, they wrote that leaving in place the lower court ruling for the person who sued them would turn that flood of litigation into a tsunami. So let's talk about the Beyonce accessibility case for a moment. So Beyonce is associated with a company that she runs called Parkwood Entertainment. And if you take a look at the text that's on this slide, it says, Beyonce.com provides to the public a wide array of goods, services, and price specials. And one moment, I want to plug in my headphones because I have some air blowing in the background and I can't hear myself. Can you all hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to plug these in really quickly. Okay, can you all still hear me? Oops, hold on.
We can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Beyonce.com provides the public a wide array of goods, services, price specials, and other programs offered by Parkwood. Yet Beyonce.com contains thousands of access barriers that make it difficult, if not impossible, for blind and visually impaired customers to use the website. In fact, the access barriers that make it possible for blind and visually impaired users to even complete a transaction on the website. Let me read that again. In fact, the access barriers make it impossible for blind and visually impaired users to even complete a transaction on the website. So thus, Parkwood excludes the blind and visually impaired from the full and equal participation in the growing internet economy that is increasingly a fundamental part of the common marketplace in daily living. In the wave of technological advances in recent years, assistive computer technology is becoming an increasingly prominent part of everyday life, allowing blind and visually impaired persons to fully and independently access a variety of services. Question: what would we go to Beyonce's website to buy? Or if you think about who your favorite entertainer is, what would you be going to the website to purchase? Someone should know this. I'm not able to see what your answers are.
Merchandise.
Oh,
Right.
merchandise.
Okay.
Susan said albums. Latonia said memorabilia, cups.
Exactly. Exactly. You want music, you want memorabilia. She even does clothes. She has a line of kids' clothes. They might have been shopping for, their child. Wonderful. Let's take a closer look at the Domino's Pizza case. The US Supreme Court rejected an appeal from Domino's Pizza, which cleared the way for a lawsuit filed by a blind man that alleges that the chain's website and mobile app weren't accessible to people with disabilities. So this meant that instead of Domino's not going to court, they were told that, yes, they had to go to court to defend themselves against the lawsuit, which alleged that the website as well as their app didn't comply with the American with Disabilities Act. Quote, the alleged inaccessibility of Domino's website and app impedes access to the goods and services of its physical pizza franchises. And this was a 3-judge panel of the San Francisco-based court. The landmark case occurred in 1999. It was the Olympic website case. And the name of the person who sued, the last name was Magnifier. So on June the 7th of 1999, a complaint was made by a blind person that he was unlawfully discriminated against in 3 respects. The first was the failure to provide Braille copies of the information required to place orders for Olympic game tickets. The second was the failure to provide Braille copies of the Olympic game souvenir programs. And the third was the failure to provide a website which was accessible to the complainant. The ticket book component of the complaint was dealt with on the 30th September of 1999. And Carolyn, I know that you were asking whether or not the Beyonce case was resolved. I don't have an answer for you at this time about that, but I can tell you that the Olympic website case was resolved. Okay, so I'll make sure I'm going in the right direction here. So the moral of this story is, if businesses are allowed to say, we do not have to make our websites accessible to blind people, that would be shutting blind people out of the economy in the 21st century. And this was quoted by Christopher Danielson, who is a representative for the National Federation of the Blind. What does that mean? Can anyone tell me what that means to you, that if we don't make our websites accessible, that we're shutting blind people out of the economy of the 21st century? What's so special about our economy?
Well, for one thing, the statistics, there's like 200 or 2 million people with visual impairments in the United
Oh,
States, and
okay.
400,000 of them are in New York State. So that's a lot of people.
Right. Okay. So let me ask this question for someone else to answer. We had blind people back in the 1900s. So would they have been shut out of the economy? What makes it so special that it's happening now in the 21st century?
Corey and Latonia answered your question before. They said
Okay.
it's discriminatory, and blind people are equal citizens and should have equal access. Shaw said laws, and then to your recent question, Alina said discrimination against the blind. Latonia said it's more digital. Karen said a lot of things are done virtually. Dominique, technology has changed throughout the years. Carolyn said they were shut out of the economy back then. It just wasn't as visible like it is with the advent of the web.
Right. So, so for those of you who answered that, because there's more technology, you hit the nail on the head. And that's why I said the 1900s, because who had a pager back then? Who had a cell phone back then? Who had a computer back then? If you know someone, raise your hand, because I would almost uh, I would almost bet that at the turn of the 20th century, which would have been 1900, that no one had a computer. I think cameras were just being invented at that time, if I'm not correct. Anyone a history buff?
Common household camera was like around 1930.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It was a brownie, Kodak brownie.
Wow, interesting. Now I'm gonna have to look that up. So now let's talk about disability inclusion. Disability inclusion means understanding the relationship between the way people function and how they participate in society. We want to make sure that everyone has the same opportunities to participate in every aspect of life to the best of their abilities and desires. And this includes people with disabilities. What does this have to do with me as a web developer? Well, one, it's just a nice thing to do. I mean, you don't want to be known as the one who, no one wants to be known as the person who discriminated against someone. At least most of us don't. It takes an awareness of how we discriminate in certain respects, and that comes with becoming more and more educated about it. Sometimes we're not aware that we discriminate. Before I became an accessibility specialist, I was not aware that through my digital products that someone not being able to read my website, or someone not being able to read a PDF file the same way that a sighted person would do, I did not realize that that was discrimination. And it is discrimination because, and especially where it concerns the learning environment like grades K through 12 or college, it puts up a barrier to those who want to learn in a college environment. So, and I'm just using that as an example. So the second point is, well, it's just the right thing to do to be inclusive. And the third point is, if a person with a disability is unable to navigate, read, or interact with your website, you're going to lose potential customers, which translates into you potentially losing money. The fourth point is, you may get a negative complaint, you may get a complaint or a negative review. No one wants to get that call or go to a review website and have a negative review against them because they were not aware or just decided not to implement simple accessibility measures. And the last item is, you know, and we've already said this, and I'm not gonna, keep pu- punching this horse in the head, but it does make you subject to lawsuit, especially if your company is subject to getting federal funds to run. And of course, lawsuits can cost you a lot of time and money. So what happens when you make your website accessible? Now we're getting into the sunshiny area. Often, improving website accessibility also makes your websites more usable in the following situations. It makes it more usable for people using mobile devices, for users who have broken arms or limited dexterity. It makes them more usable for people who are blind or have limited vision, for those who have slow internet connections and or limited bandwidth. So let's talk about barriers to reading and writing, a closer look at that. So people with disabilities often experience barriers to reading and writing because of blindness, low vision, reading focus, mobility issues, cognitive delay, which means an impairment in thinking or remembering, and attention disorders. What products do users with disabilities use to remove barriers to reading and writing? I've mentioned a few in this slide. Blind consumers use what's called screen readers. The screen reader on our MacBook Pro computers, it's called Voiceover, and this is readily available in our Mac preferences menu, and we'll talk more about how to access that tool shortly. If you're a PC user, there's a program that you can install on your computer called JAWS. I just looked at that website today, and if you have a .edu email, you can actually get a free download of this software installed on your PC. So JAWS used to be very, very expensive, which to me was a barrier in itself, but we provided it for free use at the school. So if you're a PC user and you still have your, if you still have your college or a .edu email that you have access to, you can play around with this other screen reader on the PC called JAWS. I'm not going to talk too much about JAWS today, but if you do want more information about that at any time after this presentation, just hit me up in Slack and I'll be happy to talk you through using JAWS. It's the first program that I became certified in when I first put myself out on the market to be a technology instructor. There's also another screen reader called NVDA. This one is absolutely free. There was never any charge for it, and it came out some years after JAWS. Also on the PC, you have an app called Narrator, and this is readily available within the Windows operating system. And to find out more about Narrator, I've provided a link for you so you can look at that at your convenience. So if you're someone who's visually impaired, which means that you have some vision, but it's very low, you can use screen magnification tools. You can also use what's called text readers, and you can also use reading focus tools. A text reader is different from a screen reader for the blind, and sometimes the two terms are used interchangeably, but they're very, very different. And let me tell you why. When you're someone who is blind, from the time that you turn on your computer to the time that you turn it off, you need to be able to follow the screen focus. So if you think about what you do visually, when you turn on your computer, you're looking to see what you want to click on. Well, a blind user has to tab around to those different areas of the screen to mimic the way that you would use a mouse to scroll and click. So a screen reader is able to follow the operating system through what's called a virtual cursor. You know what has the focus of the virtual cursor when you tab to it, because the screen reader will actually tell you what has focus, or it will read to you what has focus. Does anyone have a question about that? Because I know that was a bit much.
Could you just say it again, please?
Sure,
Thank
no
you.
problem, no problem.
Processing.
Okay, let me just, I need to grab my water here. Oh. Okay. When you turn on your computer, and I know we don't turn our computers off every day, but imagine coming to your computer, turning it on, and you were not able to see anything. The question is, how would you know what's there? Grabbing your mouse and clicking on everything is not going to be an efficient or good use of your time if you're someone who cannot see the screen, which is the case of a blind user. So what they do in order to be able to navigate around the operating system, and we know that the operating system on a on a PC is Windows, correct? So let's talk about what's there when we start up Windows. We have our list of programs that we can access. So there's that lower navigation bar. There's the desktop, right? And then sometimes on your desktop, you have your applications that you click on so that you can do different things. So you might have Microsoft Word sitting on your desktop. I tend to save a lot of stuff. So I have a lot of files sitting on my desktop. I might want to get to a menu bar. So how do I get to those things or those different areas of the screen if I can't see? So let's backtrack a moment. If you can see, and all of you can see, how do you get to those different areas of your screen? What do you use?
Alina says voice command. There's talk to text, voice, shortcuts.
Okay, Alina, I think you're a little ahead of me. What is the thing that you grab to move around your screen?
Oh, Karen said mouse.
Exactly. You grab your mouse and you start clicking your life away, right? Okay. A person who's blind cannot see what to click. They use screen reading software, and instead of clicking around with a mouse, they use their tab key to tab around the computer when it's first turned on. That's how they figure out where they are. So they are able to tab to the desktop. They're able to tab to menu bars. They're able to tab to different files that might be sitting on the desktop. They're able to tab to the program list. So you usually go down to your toolbar down at the bottom of your screen if you're on a PC and you click on something. If you're on a Mac, you'll go into the Finder window and you'll click on what you want to access, or you'll go into the icon on your desktop that says applications, or at least that's what it says on my computer. You'll go to that and you'll click on it, and that's how you get around. So let me let's see. So instead of me just talking about it, let me give you a visual. One moment. Okay, can everyone see my desktop?
It's kind of
It's-
blurry
it's,
and distorted.
Yeah, it's lagging.
My desktop is lagging.
But I can look at it on my other.
It
computer.
looks like your screen is still closing out.
Oh, I see. That's kind of cool.
Try unsharing your screen and then start it again.
Okay.
It's just frozen. I was
Okay.
happening to Karen as well. I'm not really sure why.
Oh, all right. I'll try again to share. Let's see.
Technology is grand, Karen.
How's that?
Looks good. Yeah, you're good. Move your
Okay.
mouse. Yeah, there you go.
All right. So I've come to my computer. I've turned it on for the first time today. I want to get to Adobe Creative Cloud. And I drag my mouse over to Adobe Creative Cloud. And what do I want to do if I want to access this folder right here?
Double click.
You have to double click, right?
And I've double clicked. All right. And then if I want to close this window that just came open when I double clicked on Adobe Creative Cloud, what do I do?
You have to
Escape
click
key
on
or
the
a red button.
Yeah.
Yes,
which obviously
exactly.
You could not see if you couldn't see it all.
Exactly.
It's very small area to
All right.
target.
So when I went over to Adobe Creative Cloud, and I clicked on it, that is what's called giving this element or this icon on the screen, that is what's called giving it the screen focus. Any questions about that? When I click on this, it becomes the focus of what's happening within my operating system. The way that we know this visually is because you can see a light white border around this. Can everyone see that? This border around Adobe Creative Cloud. I'll click on something else.
Yep.
Okay. What about the Adobe XD? You can see how when I clicked on it, how visually it changed a little bit. So if I'm blind, I don't know what has the focus. Someone would have to tell me and navigate to me, or if I have a screen reader, the way that you click to each item and give it the focus, a person who's blind can tab around the desktop to find out what has the focus. They can move around to different things. Does that clarify that concept? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, so let me get back to my presentation. Oops. Oh goodness, what slide was hold on. Oh, how does a blind user navigate a web page? I think I'm at the right place. Hold on. You all might want to look away for a minute. I don't want you to get dizzy. Okay. You can look again. So, all right, so I was discussing the difference between screen readers and text readers. So the purpose of me going through that exercise with you was to explain how a person who's blind would be able to navigate their entire operating system from the time that they start a computer until the time that, let's say they go into Microsoft Word to type a document. They may want to jump into Gmail and compose a Gmail. They're using keyboard navigation. They're not using a mouse at all. We're going to talk very extensively about keyboard navigation tomorrow. I'm just going to introduce you to keyboard navigation today and how to get set up for that. So, but just know the difference. So a screen reader allows you to navigate your operating system. In our case, it is our Mac operating system that contains all the different places that we contain, that contains our files, folders, and applications. Screen readers allow a blind person to navigate through to those areas using specialized keyboard commands. If you are someone who has vision, but you have difficulty reading, but you can still use and you still want to use a mouse, instead of using a screen reader, which might be a bit much, instead you can use what's called a screen magnifier. You can use a text reader where you can just select what you want to be read and then click a button and then just have that part of what's on your screen read to you. And you can also use focus tools. If you are mobility impaired, there are some wonderful speech to text apps and programs out there. Some years ago, one of the marquee software programs was called Dragon Naturally Speaking. It's still used a lot in the professional environment, but a lot of free options have come along. So Google has a free speech to text program. There's also a dictation built into your Mac operating system. We'll take a look at that. So yes, just some wonderful tools out there, and these tools, I'm happy to say, speech to text has become very highly accurate, whether you're using a free or a paid version. However, when you're talking about a very specialized vocabulary, such as what we have in the tech world, where we use different symbols and things of that nature, just know that it's not going to dictate everything perfectly. But as we saw with our closed captioning, a lot of the tools that we use where it concerns speech to text is very, very accurate. So I wanted to talk a little bit about learning disabilities, because we're all aware that we don't have anyone who is totally blind in our class. And so in talking about learning disabilities, there are many people in the world who have a learning disability, and people don't walk around with a sign on their forehead that says I'm learning disabled and I have difficulty with reading, writing, or remembering. But for those who do know that they have a learning disability and have struggled with it, they would answer yes to most of the following questions. Do you struggle in school? Do you think you should be doing better than you are in school? Is reading harder for you than it should be? Does your head think one thing, but your handwriting do something else? Is writing slow and tedious for you? Do you make spelling and grammatical errors when you write? Are you having difficulty with math? Is it hard for you to keep your notebooks and papers organized? Do you end up losing or forgetting them? So most schools have expertise and resources to accommodate students with learning disabilities. And if you know or suspect that you have one, you should definitely ask for help if you feel you need it. And also know that many famous people, including Tom Cruise, Whoopi Goldberg, Greg Louganis, General George Patton, Walt Disney, Winston Churchill, and so on. These are all very successful people, despite the fact that they had or currently have learning disabilities. Assistive technology and Mac accessibility tools. Now we're getting to the good stuff. Oops. So, assistive technology. Assistive technology is an overall category of devices and tools used by people with disabilities. They help to eliminate barriers to reading, writing, and using the internet and applications. You'll hear assistive technology commonly referred to as AT. On a Mac, we have accessibility tools, also known as assistive technology, and they are put together in certain categories. So within the Mac, there is a category called General, Vision, Media, Hearing, and Interaction, and we'll look at those momentarily. Our focus, for the sake of this boot camp, are going to be on disabled users who are blind and blind but also use a Mac computer. So I have a screenshot up on the screen here that shows you the different categories that our accessibility tools are listed in within our Mac. So there's General, Vision, Media, Hearing, and Interaction. And if you take a look at the section that says Vision, that's where we're going to focus on. Within Vision, there's the Voiceover tool. There's also a Zoom tool. You can also configure your display and speech options. All right, so I'm going to show you how to access those accessibility tools. And then we'll stop for a minute or two, and then I will have you all copy my clicking and keystrokes here to make sure that you know how to get to them. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to click on the Apple icon in the upper left corner of your screen, and then click on System Preferences. And if you want to go ahead and do that now while I'm talking, feel free. And then after you click on System Preferences, you want to find the accessibility button. It'll be somewhere, actually, let me go to it now. So if you take a look at the mouse on my screen, you should be able to see it's directly under the item that says accessibility. So if you go ahead and you click on that button, then you should be able to see what I have in my slide. So when you click on accessibility, what's displayed is a list of tools along the left side of the window. We'll be using and activating the tool called Voiceover for our web accessibility deep dive. Is there anyone who has not been able to get into this area? If you haven't, please say so that I can repeat the directions or
Yeah.
type into the chat.
I'm showing something a little bit different in my menu. When I click on the accessibility button, icon, whatever, I have overview. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it just looks different, but it's the same stuff. Never mind.
Oh, okay.
I'm good. I just got disoriented because
I have
I'm
a dark
bad. Sorry.
background. That's okay.
Sorry.
Just know that I've just to avoid eye strain, the theme of my operating system is set to dark. So it
Right.
can look a little
I've
different.
done that with a lot of stuff too, but it looked different in other ways too, but I'm good. I'll shut up
Okay.
now.
I think
Sorry.
It's just an update. If your Mac looks different, it might be a different OS version.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, so it might just be the icons look different, but
Yeah.
generally it should be similar.
And on that note, I have not updated in about a year because space is so limited on my Mac right now. So I really I've been trying to downsize, and then within a day or two, it's telling me that I'm almost out of room again. So once I deal with that issue completely, then I'll be able to update, and then everything on my screen might look the same as yours. Any other questions about what we just did?
In the chat, some people are saying just let them know when to do voiceover because they can't hear you over the voice.
Right, we're not, yeah, we're not going to do voiceover right now, so don't activate it. I just want you to know where to find it.
Okay.
All right, so let's close out of this accessibility window. So if you want to quickly open your accessibility options, what you'll do is you'll press the, oops, sorry, forgot I can't click on my screen. You'll want to press Option, Command, and F5. Option, Command, and F5. And if anyone wants to try that, let me know if it worked. It should. Anyone having success with the shortcut? Let me try it on my computer.
For me to do the function key F5, I have to press the function key and a 5. There must be an easier way because then I'm trying to do 4 keys.
Okay, so the F5 should be right above the number 5 on your keyboard on your Mac.
I have my the thing that shows up that's lit up that I can use.
Mhm.
I don't have any function stuff there.
You don't have any function stuff? Okay.
I didn't. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll figure that out.
Is it the same for everyone else?
You know, I've got you know the toolbar,
Yes.
Mhm.
a customize, not the toolbar. What's it called? The thing that you can customize down that lights up on your keyboard.
Oh, I did it on my personal MacBook and it pops up the accessibility So it does work on the old MacBook, but
Oh, it
on the
does.
newer MacBooks, we don't
Mhm.
have like the F5. We just have the
Yeah,
You don't
the
have the
touch
F5.
bar. Well, we have the touch bar on the
Oh,
newer MacBooks,
okay.
yeah, so you have to do
but
option,
it does work on
command,
like the
function,
older
and
MacBooks without the touch
Okay.
bar.
Okay, then. All right. So don't worry about then. Don't worry about that then. All right. So
well, it says you might need to press the FN key as well. So that's, yeah, that's, so I didn't actually try it to see if it would work, but I wasn't sure if that was right because it would be 4 keys, but we're done.
okay then. Carolyn, if you get time, if you can send me a picture of what your keyboard looks like. Don't do it right now. Wait until break or after class is done. I would appreciate it.
I can do that.
Okay, no
Yeah.
problem.
A selfie. Good.
Definitely.
Keyboard selfie.
All right. So I didn't have you activate Voiceover, but I will have you activate Zoom. Zoom is your screen magnifier, and it lets you enlarge the contents that you see on your device. You can choose from full screen magnification, picture in picture, or picture in picture, which shows the magnified area in a separate window, while the rest of your screen stays the same. And Zoom also works with VoiceOver so that you can better see as well as hear what's happening on your screen. Zoom displays on your Mac, and it lets you see content up close and at a distance simultaneously. With 2 displays, you can keep one zoomed, and while in the other, it stays at a standard resolution for a customizable multi-zoom setup. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back up to our Apple icon. We're going to go to System Preferences, and let's click on Accessibility. And over on the left side of the window, let's click where it says Zoom. And hold on. Okay, mine wants to zoom my full screen, which is fine with me. If you click, oh, let me go back out. All right, so if you click here where it says options, you can set a maximum range for zoom as well as a minimum. So maximum zoom means if you have a lot of difficulty with seeing, you would probably want to increase the magnification. So that's what maximum zoom means, that you're increasing the magnification, which means that as you zoom in, those small things get larger and larger. Minimum just means that it's not going to go below a certain threshold. All right, so I'm just going to click OK on that. I hope I'm doing this right. All right, and then we said we weren't going to use the keyboard shortcuts. So I'm actually just going to uncheck that. And I'm hoping that it'll still activate. All right, so. Oh, I think I know why I'm not able to zoom, because I'm in, my screen is being shared. Is there anyone who was able to activate their Zoom? I
So
think
ours looks a little bit different. It's instead of clicking on, I think you said options, there's a button called advanced. And
Okay,
then I found those settings in there. You have to, there's 2 tabs, appearance and controls, and you have to choose controls. And then
Okay.
you have those zoom, the sliders that you were showing.
okay, wonderful. Were you able to get your screen to look larger?
I'm just trying it now.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to. Do I have to close completely out of the accessibility?
You can try that. I'm looking at this. I wonder if I'm missing something. Let's see. I'm going to use my shortcut keys to toggle just to demonstrate it. And and then we'll move on from there because that's usually how I get to it. So my shortcut key is going to be, I'm looking at the wrong keyboard. That's going to be Option, Command, and the number 8. So I'll just demonstrate it briefly. One moment. There we go. All right. So it zoomed on my screen. Did it zoom on yours also on the screen share?
No.
It didn't? Okay. All right. Sorry about that, you
And
guys,
again, I
but
had different choices. Some of those choices you had didn't show up, so.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll
Play
just
with
move.
accessibility anyway, just because it's fun. so-
Yes, you
like-
can play
like
with it
jumping
on
on
your
my computer.
own. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I didn't realize that it was different. And it's also not rendering through the screen share. So we'll just move on
Yeah.
from that. But it's good for you to be aware of that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so it is about 6:36 and we'll move on to the next topic. And this is a really fun one for me because I think that this is the toughest part of the process, but it's really not tough or difficult at all if you know how to approach it. And there are a couple of different ways that you can approach evaluating a website for accessibility. So in approaching evaluating a website for accessibility, there are 2 methods that are usually taken. The first method is for a human being to evaluate the website. The second method is to use automated tools, which will evaluate the website. And in discussing these 2 different options, I've actually put a link here that's connected to a blog post that discusses the pros and cons of both methodologies. But to summarize which method is best, they're
What are we
really,
getting?
We're not sure if they're open or not.
Oh, okay. Just regular smaller burger
Yeah, we
and.
don't,
okay. So in discussing which methodology is best, the pros of using automated tools is that they quickly scan your code and the construction of your site to find known accessibility obstacles. But something that's not so good about using automated tools is that they can't use, understand, and interact with your site the way that a human would. And so they're not detecting everything that might be an obstacle. An obstacle as far as any semantic meaning or images or even your site operation. So there are programs and tools that can help you to check for each one of these issues one at a time, but you really have to be careful with the automated tools because they are not a one-stop shop towards making sure that your websites are completely accessible. As far as human evaluating, the pros of having someone who will sit and look at the code and use a screen reader like Voiceover to evaluate, they have to know what to do. They have to know how to navigate with a screen reader, or at least they should. They have to know how to look for the issues. They have to know what to look for in the code. And with you all being coding newbies, you're currently learning how to code. So in addition to learning how to code, you will also need to know what are the things that I can add to my code to make sure that it is accessible for someone with a visual impairment or who's blind. So a person who is doing a manual evaluation, they will be able to identify obstacles posed by semantic meaning. We'll talk about semantic meaning shortly. They can detect and see obstacles that would be posed by images or site operation. So what are the not so good things about evaluating with a human being? Relatively speaking, it's not the fastest way to evaluate a website, which is fine. There is a bit of a learning curve depending on how much you know about website code. And you also need to know that CSS is not included in an accessibility check because CSS is only helping to determine the look of your website. And I say CSS is not usually included. So because I know that I don't know everything, I don't personally know of any examples where CSS needs to be included in an accessibility check. That's not to say that it has never happened.
I say one thing that matters in terms of
Go.
CSS,
Go ahead.
your colors that you choose for your website, readability, text on specific background colors. Some font colors are not as readable on certain background colors as others, and that's very important as well. So even if somebody's not using assistive technology, from a readability standpoint, even color blindness, it can matter a lot for that stuff. But I think that's like the only thing I can think of in terms of CSS and design. But
Okay, great.
there are definitely, yeah, the visual design implications, Carolyn. Yeah,
Okay, thank you for mentioning that.
you're welcome.
Mhm. So, and usually with checking for color, we do like the color contrast checking, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So there are free accessibility tools to test for multiple accessibility issues. These tools test individual pages of your site for multiple issues at once. And there is a really good website called Accessible Metrics that can test your entire site for these issues. And they provide regular updates to detect problems as you add new pages and content. So I actually provided the link to everyone at the bottom of the slide if you want to check it out. So with a free account, you can test individual pages of your website for ADA and Section 508 compliance. And with a subscription, you can test your entire site at regular intervals and get alerts about any accessibility issues. But I would not recommend subscribing to anything that you have to pay for at this point, because there are just too many tools out on the market. And, with a little bit of self-determination and learning how to do some manual checks, you can usually get through a great majority of an accessibility check without having to pay a dime. There is also a website called cynthiasays.org. And it educates the user on the concepts behind website accessibility. And then the third option, and excuse my typos, the third option is called Wave. I've used Wave for a number of years off and on, and it's through an organization called webaim.org. And a lot of people who work on personal as well as their professional websites actually use this tool. So Wave is one that I am personally recommending if you want to look more into automated testing. We're not going to, we may have time towards the end of class to do an automated test, but just know that if we don't, because we have a lot of material to talk through, that all of our hands-on work as far as looking at code, making sure that it's accessible, doing a very targeted manual check as well as automated check, all of that I'm planning on doing with you all tomorrow. But today we're building the toolkit. So I've given you three resources here to do automated testing, in addition to a website called Accessible Metrics where you can get more information. All right, and Caitlin, as you were just mentioning, checking for color contrast. This is something that you definitely need to do. Color contrast definitely affects those who are colorblind and also those who have low vision. because without the proper contrast between foreground and background elements, and usually the biggest thing is the contrast between your text color and the background color, you can make it very difficult for someone to read and see what's on your website. So you want to make your website usable for those with color blindness, poor vision. You must have a certain contrast between these colors on your website, and the contrast can actually be measured. So if an individual can't distinguish the background from the foreground, your content is considered illegible. That means that it can't be made out. It might as well be chicken scratch, and therefore it's not accessible. So I've listed a few resources here for you that you can check out. One is called Accessible Colors. There's also a color contrast checker. And then there is one at color.a11y.com. That's supposed to be Alley, but instead of Alley, it uses a 1 and a 1. And then, and you don't have to remember this. Once again, the URL to the link, if you copy and paste that into your browser, all of the clickable links are available at the website. Speaking of color contrast, Caitlin, do you have a tool that you like to use to check color contrast? Okay, I'll just, when you get back or come off of mute, feel free to answer. So I don't have a favorite tool that I like to use for a color contrast check, but who knows, maybe in the next week or two, I may have one. So let's talk about browser choice during website accessibility testing, because the amount of checking that you're able to do with a screen reader is definitely going to depend on which browser you're using. It's not a one size fits all kind of an option. Your browser choice matters. When doing a check for a web page accessibility on your Mac, I know that we have always told you to use Chrome for just about everything that we do here in the boot camp. But when you start to do accessibility checking, please switch over to Safari. The reason is because Safari is from Apple, and it is their product of choice that they use, that when they created their accessibility tools, they always test their tools on their own products first. So, and I actually tested it out earlier this week. There are a lot of things that you can do with VoiceOver in Safari that you are not able to do in Chrome. And as you play around, well, as we play around tomorrow, I'm actually going to have a very good demonstration of this for you to see for yourself.
Dana,
Yes.
I have a question.
Go
Dana
ahead.
said, would you say accessibility is easier for the user on the Mac versus Windows?
Okay, so my answer is going to be kind of biased on this because I didn't start out using a Mac. I've always been a Windows girl. And then what happened was when I left Assistive Technology for a number of years because I was taking care of a sick loved one. And when I came back, the world had changed. All the students were now using Macs, and I was actually forced into learning about Mac accessibility for the sake of my job. I would say, in answering that question, I'm going to answer it from the user standpoint. A great majority of totally blind consumers use PCs, and they use a program called JAWS with the Windows operating system. And that's where I cut my teeth in this business.
Also, Corey wants to know if you can turn on closed caption.
I have to find it. Hold on. Do you know where I can find it, Caitlin?
I don't, I was just looking, I don't have access to do that either.
Okay,
so-
hold on. Let's see. Okay, I just clicked on something called live transcript.
Yeah,
Does that help everyone?
that's what it's called, but I don't see it yet.
That's fine. This is so much good information, Dana. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yep. Let me click on it again.
Yeah,
Does anyone, did it come up on anyone's screen, the live transcript?
not for me,
Not on mine.
No? Okay, let me try it again.
sorry.
That's okay. Oops. All right.
Maybe we can figure it out. at the
Yeah,
break.
we can figure it out on break, Corey. I'm sorry. I made a mental note to turn on
No
closed
problem, that's cool.
captions and
No
yeah.
problem. Mhm.
All right. All right. So browser choice matters. So how do blind users navigate a web page? We talked about this briefly in the little exercise that I did when I went to my desktop. Some common ways a blind user can navigate a website using keyboard commands are by pressing keyboard commands to read an entire page. They can also jump around a page like a sighted user. And so when you read through web pages or any type of physical document, you don't really consider it jumping around, right? The same way that you would if you were, playing hopscotch or something, but your eyes jump around. How many of us have been giving a reading assignment and instead of reading it from top to bottom, we've just skimmed? That is a form of cognitive jumping, right? With our eyes and our mind. And what my question for you is, what physical things on a web page or in a book give you cues to let you know that you're skimming? So let me just rephrase this. So let's say if I had a law textbook, right? And I just wanted to skim, and we know that textbooks are usually broken up into sections. What is on that page that lets me know that I've gone from one section to the next? What do I see? What is my mouse under?
They said heading.
Exactly. And when I get to a heading that interests me or something that I think I need to know more about because it might be on an exam, I'll switch from reading the heading to reading the, what is my mouse under?
Paragraph.
Yep, paragraph or sentence, right? Okay. So in building our web pages, the same way that you are able to read with your eyes, you want to make sure that you provide the same type of reading experience for a blind person, except that they cannot see it. They're relying on the screen reader to let them know where they are. So I know that you all have learned about heading levels, right? H1 through H6. When you are in VS Code and you are typing your heading levels, we tell you to go in order, and you start with a H1, which would be your main heading, right? So when a blind user tabs around a web page, if they want to tab by headings, they can do that. They can skim the same way that we skim if you use the HTML and mark up your pages properly. So use your heading levels in order. Don't skip. Don't skip from an H1 to an H3 without having an H2 there. When you're, if you're creating a data table, you want to make sure that you mark it up so that you indicate the headers that are there. And Latonia and I had a conversation about this earlier today, and I actually sent some sample code in Slack just to give you an idea of what the markup should look like if you are properly coding for a data table. And some of you should have already seen that. Carolyn, I know that you saw it, correct? Carolyn and Latonia. So how you mark up your web pages matters. So when a blind user is navigating, they can press a keyboard command to tell Voiceover that they want to read by paragraph. They want to read by sentence. They can read by word. They can read by individual letters. Blind users can jump around through the links the same way that we do as a sighted user. We talked about headings, but in addition, the screen reader will also allow a person who is blind to go directly into a form field and begin filling out a form. So this is important for people who want to buy things. Like we mentioned with the person who filed the lawsuit against Beyonce and Domino's, those websites use form fields that blind people need to be able to land in, and they need to be able to type into those areas to say, hey, I want to order this item. And then they need to be able to type out of a form field, they need to be able to tab out of a form field. They need to be able to get into a shopping cart. They need to be able to get the price. They don't see that. They need to be able to hear all of that. And at the point that they are not able to experience auditorily, that is by hearing, if they are not able to hear that information to confirm their interaction, their desire to buy something from your website, if they are not able to fill out a form or complete a transaction, then that web page is considered not accessible. And for more information on using, I'll go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, because the header is not have those components programmed into it.
Header does have those components programmed into it. What happens is sometimes people cheat and they won't use H1. We don't do this as much anymore, but you can fake the look of a header by just simply going into the code, and you can set your font size and you can set it for bold and it will look like a header, but the screen reader is not just reading the text on the screen. It's looking for cues from the code that you put around different pieces within the HTML. So Voiceover knows that when it comes across H1 in your code, it's going to announce to the blind person, this is a header. And then that way the blind person knows, oh, this is a header. I've come to another section of the page. Now, are you making the connection?
Yep, that was
Okay.
good. Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
So alternatively, if I'm someone who doesn't know that headers matter, and I've always just said, you know what, I don't like the way that header looks by default, and I want my headers to always be font size 36, bold, and Helvetica font, right? I can visually, I can make my headers look any way that I want them to look, but instead of manually doing that, you should always use H1 through H6 for your headers and then style them. Don't put a paragraph tag and then style the paragraph so that it looks like a header, because what you're doing is you are preventing a blind individual from accessing how your content is structured. And headings tell us how your content is structured. It's telling us H1s are more important to the topic than an H2. If I'm a blind user and I hear H1, that's telling me main idea. H2 is letting me know, oh, this must be a subtopic within this. And so in my mind as a blind user, I am creating a visual in my mind of the outline of your content. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Any other questions about that? So the structure of your page is very important, and you have to use code properly to create the structure. So as a blind user, oftentimes I want to navigate a web page by the different elements or grouped items. For example, if it's a website that I've visited before, let's say, well, let me think about one that I go to often. Let's say that I am studying, I don't know, let's say that I'm studying chemistry. And I know that when I left, when I was on the last page that I was studying, I decided I wanted to take a break, and I would come back in the morning and study some more, as usually happens with students, correct? So I have my screen reader on, and when it starts, it lands at the very beginning of that page. This means that if there was a chart or a table on that page that had data in it, but it wasn't at the very beginning of that page, let's say it was somewhere near the end, as a blind user, if I don't know what the keystrokes are to get me to that table or that chart, I'm going to have to listen to a whole bunch of text, maybe a whole bunch of links before it finally gets to the element on the page that I'm looking for. As a sighted user, do you have to wait to get to that element and read what might be on the chart or the table if you had to take a break and come back? No, the answer is no, you don't. You take your eyeballs and all you do is just look at that part of the page and you can find what you're looking for. By using specialized keystroke commands in VoiceOver, a blind person can do the same. If you properly mark up something as a table, there are keystroke commands, or there's, as it says on the screen, you can use a tool within VoiceOver called the rotor. So we pull up the rotor, and the rotor is simply an interface that I can scroll through, and it's like it's visually asking me, well, how do you want to navigate this page? And by navigating the rotor, it allows me to pick from different lists. One of the lists is navigate by links. A rotor can also allow you to navigate by table. So instead of going through all the text on a page, I can just go through a specialized list for just that one element. It will bring up a list of all of those elements on that page and put them in order. And I can just go through that list until I find what I'm looking for, hit enter, and it will take me directly there instead of me having to wait God knows how long to read an entire page. So on the next slide is an example of what the rotor looks like. So when I activate in VoiceOver what's called the rotor, this is an example of one of the screens, and then we'll take a break after this because I see it's already 7:04. And so we just had a discussion of headings, right? When I activate Rotor, it says 1 Mac. That simply means at heading level number 1, because it peeked into my HTML, it says, you have an H1, and the text inside of that H1 is Mac. The first heading level 2 that it found was text that says voice control, tell your Mac exactly what you, and then it gets cut off, right? But then you notice a bunch of 2s here. So this is not a sequential listing for the headings. What it is it's telling you that there's a bunch of stuff at heading level 2. So if this were an outline, heading level 1 would be my main idea, which is Mac. And then these would be, everything that's listed as a 2 would be a subheading, and it would be indented maybe 5 spaces to the right. So I'm trying to give you a visual here of how your page structure is helping the screen reader to help a blind user to be able to navigate through your page structure if they want to skim. But take a look here. This one says number 3. So right above that, we had something that says at heading level 2, resources. So a heading level 3 under resources just means that now we're at another sublevel, right? Because a heading level 3 is not as important as a heading level 2. And in an outline, this would be further indented. And then we have a heading level 4. So that would be further indented to the right. But then we go to user guide. And then, so user guide is not indented at this point. So we have a heading level 3 here. Excuse me, I have a heading level 3 that says support, heading level 3 that says user guide, and then a subheading under user guide, which we know that because it says number 4, which means that it's indented again. That says voice control, switch control, and accessibility. So when we go into the rotor area for Voiceover, we can bring up a list of our different elements, and we can move back and forth through the different lists so that as a blind user, I am able to skim through the different sections of your content the way that a sighted person would skim visually. And this is very, very important, especially when you're in a learning environment. What if you have someone who's learning law or history or art history? Anybody ever taken any of those courses? What about chemistry? Aren't those textbooks usually really big and heavy and they break your back when you're walking across campus with them? It takes a lot to get through that reading as a sighted person. So proper markup and structure of your pages creates a similar reading experience. It is actually, so in talking about discrimination, when you do not create the same type of reading experience, if you do not give proper page structure, it is considered to be a form of discrimination, especially when you're talking about creating accessible text in a college environment, which I did for a number of years. Even when it comes to your PDF files, they have to be properly marked up, and there's a way that can be done. So if you're someone who is creating a website and then your users have to click on something that gives them access to a PDF file, the PDF has to be accessible. I'll give you a perfect example of that. So at one of the departments in one of the schools, they were creating their, what do you call these? They were creating the sports schedules. So you have your basketball schedule, you have your football schedule. So at that particular time, instead of being available directly on the website, the schedules, because there were a lot of visual elements and you want everything to look right, they were using one program to create it all. Within that program, everything was accessible, but when they hit the button to turn it to a PDF, some things happened. And so this particular department got a complaint that there was a person who was blind who was trying to find a sports event and the PDFs were not accessible. So they had to take all those PDFs back to the drawing board, and they had to figure out how to give this blind person the same type of reading experience and access as a person who was sighted. So to summarize that piece, in order to be able to skim, so that if you're on a web page that has a lot of content, a lot of different sections to easily find what you're looking for, I will also be showing you how to use Rotor to bring up the different sections of a web page so that we can hop around. Any questions about that before we go to break? All right, if there are no questions, it's 7:11. So let's come back at about 7:26. And I'll stop sharing my screen. I'm not able to see any of your faces when I'm on screen share. I just wanted to say that I'm not used to that. I feel like I'm talking to myself, but that's okay. I'll get used to it.
Well, I was kind of incognito after I somehow got myself out of Zoom and came back in. I didn't realize the camera was still off, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh.
Oh, goodness.
It's like, you
Okay.
have to know I'm here.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Alina, I see your question. You had a question that said talk to text. Talk to text is the same as speech to text. Oh, wow. You all have been chatting it up, I see. Enjoy your breaks. It's getting hot, y'all. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. So for everyone coming back, oh, hold on. Turn the volume down on this other computer. Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, thanks, Ariel. So I'm attempting to resolve the issue with you all not having function keys. I found something at Mac support that talks about the touch bar. And it says you can hold down the function key on your keyboard to see F1 through F12 in your touch bar. That works. I see some of you nodding. Okay. All right, I want full participation here. I don't want anyone left out, so.
So you still have to use 4 keys.
Yes, that's.
And I only have 3
that's,
fingers. No, just kidding. right.
So let me see what it says here.
Yeah, that worked. The option, command, and function, and then you get all the function keys on the top touch bar,
Mhm.
whatever that's called, and you can hit F5. And it brought up the accessibility.
Wonderful. Okay. Now, after you hit your function key, did you have to keep your finger on it to hit F5, or were you able to just hit function and then hit F5?
You have to hold it down because
Oh,
when
you
you
have to
lift your
hold it.
finger, the function keys all disappear.
Oh, okay then.
But you can hold down the function key alone, and
Mhm.
then your key stay illuminated and you can push whatever on you. So you can just use one finger to hold down the function key.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So Corey, for you, were you able to make it a 3-finger process or
Two.
a 2-finger process? So can you share what you did? You're actually, so you're saying you were able to pull up the accessibility area as a 2-finger process?
Yes, what I did was I followed, I think you said option, command, and function. Hit those 3 together to pull up the menu. But then when you let go of option and command and just hold down the function key,
Mm-hmm.
the function keys remain illuminated on the keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
And all I can do is select the one that you want me to hit. So I have my
Okay.
function key held
Okay.
down and then
Okay.
choose my option.
Okay. So you hit option, command, and function,
And it pulled
and
up the menu.
and then you were able to let go and then just use the 1 finger to
Right.
hit F5.
Yes.
Okay. Carolyn, you want to try that? Oh, I have a message. Okay, Dominique says that the 1-finger process worked for her. Okay, Fabilia, Alina, thank you. Thank you all for letting me know that it's working for you. And Carolyn, if you continue to have problems with it, we can maybe try it out after the lecture is over. All right, so I'm going to pull up my presentation and we'll move on to the next thing. Corey, thank you for your explanation of that. And is everyone able to see the closed captions? I activated them during the break. Okay, wonderful. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Is everyone able to see my share? Okay. And so Caitlin, I'm at the point where I'm not able to see the chat. So if anyone's having any problems, she'll have to let me know. Oh, actually, I can see it on this other computer here. Okay, I see thumbs up.
Yep, you can
Wonderful.
just click and drag it over if you, but I'm looking anyway, so.
Okay, no problem. All right, so what we'll do is, I know that some of you want to dive into VoiceOver. I will actually save time at the end of the lecture so that we can begin playing around with it. So don't try to activate it now, because if you do, you're not going to be able to hear me and the lecture at the same time. So let's get through our talking points and then we'll play around before we leave tonight. So let's see. So hold on, let me make sure I'm at the right place. Okay, so when you left, we were talking about the rotor window and how when you actually code out your pages, that it is your code that is determining what's seen in the rotor. All of your headings can be placed in a list together. All of your links can be placed in a list together. Tables, captions, figures, things like that. Screen readers have the ability to group elements so that if someone who cannot see how your page is structured through the rotor, they can get the list of all the different sections that you have there. And when they find the section or the item that they're looking for, what they'll do is they'll just hit the up down arrow to go through the rotor list. They hit enter and they can automatically jump to that section instead of having to sit and listen to an entire web page before they can get to what they're looking for, the same way that you would skim. And it creates a much more, it creates a much more, I want to say, it's not only inclusive, but just a better reading experience. So, and we talked about the reasons why, because if you have a text that has a lot of pages, a lot of different areas, when you're a student and you're trying to learn, sometimes you just want to jump from one section to the next until you actually find what you're looking for.
Dana, Corey asked a question in chat.
Sure.
He said, is the rotor built into the computer or do we have to include it in code?
So rotor is actually a feature of VoiceOver. VoiceOver has to be active before you can get into a rotor list. And the rotor list works better if you're bringing it up in Safari. I had Chrome open and I had Safari open, and for some reason, when VoiceOver interacts with Chrome, it doesn't recognize all of the different sections the way that that same web page does if I bring it open in Safari. So let's say I had apple.com and I opened it up. Well, actually, this is what I did. I had apple.com and I opened it up in Safari. And then I had apple.com and I opened it up in Chrome. That rotor list, when I brought it up, brought up more sections and elements in Safari than it did in Chrome. And that's why Apple is advising that you don't use Chrome with VoiceOver, because it will give the impression that the web page is not accessible when actually it is. Okay. So when we get ready to use rotor, these are the directions. You first have to make sure that VoiceOver is activated. You should also make sure that you're in Safari. You'll open the VoiceOver rotor by pressing your VoiceOver key and then the letter U. Now let me stop here because we haven't actually talked about this, what the VoiceOver command key is. On my computer, I am using caps lock. And for the sake of our exercises, just to copy or mimic what I'm doing, I'll be saying hit caps lock you, hit caps lock this. I may use that interchangeably with saying use your voiceover key. So what you're doing is, in order to be able to navigate, you're using keystroke combinations. And this is what allows a user who cannot see the screen, this is what allows them to move to different areas on a web page without sight. So in my case, that VO represents caps lock. Also with you, for the sake of the exercises, when you see VO, you know that you're doing the caps lock in combination by whatever the next letter or keystroke is. If at any point you want to change it from caps lock to something else, you have two other options. Okay, and when we actually go back into the accessibility list, I can show you where you can change it from caps lock to something else. All right, so, but that's not important. Moving on to number 3, and we already talked about how to navigate in Rotor. You can go through the list using the right arrow or the left arrow key until you hear the list that you want, such as your window spots or your headings. I think the list that would be most valuable to folks when they first go to a website would be the list of links. So your links are also representative of the website structure. So, oops, sorry about that. Depending on the app that you're in, you may hear content chooser. The content chooser provides quick access to content lists in an app. So for example, in Mail, the content chooser lists the messages shown in the messages list. In the week view and calendar, it shows the number of events for each day. So when you're in the browser, you are going to hear this as the rotor list. When you're in an app like Mail, just know that instead of saying rotor list, it may say content chooser, but they're both the same. So when you navigate the list of items, you're going to use your up and your down arrow until you find the item that you want. All right, and then when you found what you want, you hit your return key or you hit your space bar to select that item and jump to it. All right, and then when you do that, that rotor list closes. So being able to successfully navigate a web page using the rotor list depends a lot on the HTML that you use within your HTML document. And you've probably heard the term semantic HTML. Well, this means using correct HTML elements for their correct purposes as much as possible. Semantic elements are elements with meaning. So if you need a button, you use the button element and not a div element. So I gave you an example of a semantic element here. So around the text that says click me, we have the tag that says button. Non-semantic would mean that you intended this to be a button, but instead of using the button tags, you used a div tag instead. And sometimes folks will do this. They'll use a div tag, but then they'll style it as a button. But this is not accessible to a screen reader because the tag itself does not say button. So when you're marking up your items semantically, what you're doing is you're giving meaning to that section. And that is what's read by the screen reader. To do some exploring and a deeper look at semantics, I've put in to this slide a link to a blog article. And you can go ahead and click on that now. It's going to be important just to take a quick look at that. I'll go ahead and click on it also. So when we talk about constructing the different sections to our website, what can we use instead of div? Sorry
Container?
about that. We actually have a list. Sorry about that. Did someone say container?
That would be Carolyn.
Oh, hey, Carolyn. Well, let's look and see if it's here. All right, so the first item that's on the list is main. So we're currently, sorry about that, hold on. I have all kind of telephones going off in the background. Let's see now. Sorry about that. Let me turn off my Google phone. Didn't realize that was still on. Okay. Now, where were we? All right. So let's go through the list. First, the first item listed is the main element. The main element indicates to the browser and screen readers which portion of your markup contain the main section of content on a given page. And there's your code example. And it says that the main element can help with keyboard command access, zooming on mobile browsers, and more. And you should only use it once per page. The section element. This element is used to group content by theme, and it represents a section of a document or an application. Sections can have their own header and footer elements, and there can be multiple section elements used on a single page. So main should only be used once, and section can be used more than once. So knowing this, I would probably be using section instead of div, because section will be announced, whereas div would not be announced. And I think that's a great way, if I am a blind computer user, for you to let me know that I've jumped to another section. Now, if you don't use section, does that mean that your page is not accessible? No, it doesn't. But it's just a nice thing to do to create more meaning around the reading experience, because what you're going to be doing anyway, which is going to let you know whether or not your website is passing or failing accessibility, is even without section, the section element, you're still creating the heading levels. So, but section is just a great way to group related items together. So if we take a look at that, so here we have main, which we said only use once on the page, and then everything else for the website is right here. So we have one section that begins here. All right, and this is about skateboard intro. And this section has a header and a paragraph. And that's what the readers, that is what you're going to see on the screen. And that is what the blind user is going to hear. So the screen reader will literally say section, heading level 1, and then it'll say skateboards. The skateboard is the cool way to get kids around. Section, heading level 1, history of skateboard. Skateboarding was born in the late 1940s or early 1950s. The screen reader doesn't sound as nice as me, but close enough. Next, the article talks about aside. Aside elements are mainly used to represent part of a page containing related contents to a given section. Asides are typically used as sidebars. And I love that this article gives code examples, so you don't have to guess. the article element. The article element can be used for portions of your content that could stand on their own. Blog posts, newspaper articles, and user comments are some possible use cases for the article element. So what am I really saying to you here? What I'm saying to you is, while using the div tag is totally fine, you can create a much nicer and meaningful reading experience for your blind consumers if you start using these semantic tags. Nav, and we use Nav a lot. As the name implies, Nav elements represent the navigation section of a document. The Nav element should include the primary navigation links for a given page or application. And footer, I know a lot of you are already familiar with the footer element. It's the section of the document, and it usually appears at the bottom of the page. It usually contains contact information, copyright information. There might be a brief about section. And let's see, here's footer right here in this example. So when you use these semantic tags, instead of using div, what you do is you give the rotor more power. When we bring up our rotor list, it can literally bring up every single article section that you have. It can bring up block quote sections that you have. It can bring up any footer sections that you have, and so on. So does that help you to see how the rotor relates to the underlying code? I hope that it does. I think this was a great example. Any questions in the chat about that, Caitlin? Is everybody okay?
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any questions specifically.
Okay, wonderful. All right, moving on to the next thing. So now that we've talked about semantics, how do we know when to use each of them? And is it okay to still use div in our markup? So there's a website called the HTML5 Doctor that has a flow chart that can help you to answer that question. You can click on that if you want, but in the next slide, I've provided you with an HTML element flow chart. And it actually covers just about every single semantic element that we just talked about. So if you need help trying to figure out when you can use a semantic element instead of using div, please use this flow chart. Save it somewhere handy so that you can pull it up. All right, so let's talk about the sections in a web page. And we've talked about some of these already. We talked about the, look, I saw it pop up. Someone said that the flow chart was really helpful. Thank you. Let's talk about the main element. The main element indicates to a browser and screen reader which portions of your HTML markup contain the main section of content on a given page. This is going to help blind users with their keyboard command access, zooming on mobile browsers, and more. It should only be used once per page. All right, and I'll probably skip past some of these because we've already talked about them. I think the section element is worth going over one more time. because your sections group content by theme and they represent a section of a document or an application. Sections can have their own headers and footer elements, and you can have multiple sections of elements on a single page. And I'll skip past the rest of these because what you're going to do is, as you strive towards making your code more meaningful for blind users, you'll be using that flow chart to help you to decide when you can get away from using div and use a semantic markup instead. So what makes a page difficult to read? One moment, please. All right, I need to stop sharing for a moment. This is where I get in trouble because I can't see my notes and your slides at the same time. All right, I'm just going to stop the share, you all. So as I'm talking, just if you already have your own slides pulled up on your screen, go ahead and look at those while I'm talking. All right, so web page authors need to follow certain guidelines to make their pages accessible to screen reading software. So if you're not designing with accessibility in mind, this in itself makes the web pages difficult to read. Occasionally, you're going to come across pages that are poorly designed or difficult to use with VoiceOver. And so there are things that a more experienced blind user who's using a screen reader that they can do, but it's just best not to even have to face that dilemma. So just make sure that you're designing your pages properly. Some of your web pages are going to automatically refresh. Corey, did you have a question?
Yes, so why don't coders use those semantics universally so that it's more accessible for the blind and so forth?
They don't always know that they're available. And so if given a choice just to throw a div in there that is just so intuitive because div is division, it's what a lot of people learn first. It's been around for a long time. I think that it's just a natural thing unless you're given some type of business purpose, which is what we're discussing now. We're saying that it creates more accessibility. You have to remember accessibility, it's known, it's a known concept, but as far as knowing what to do, it's still kind of a, it's not like, it's considered the extra step. Does that make sense? And so what happens is, it's human nature. We don't change easily, right? What's brought this to the forefront, unfortunately, has been a lot of lawsuits. And so I was saying at the beginning of the talk, I'm not bringing up the lawsuits to scare you, but the reason why accessibility is being pushed to the forefront now is because there's so much that's being done on computers and cell phones and laptops that these accessibility issues get pushed further and further to the forefront. and a lot of visually impaired and blind users within that community. What happens sometimes is when a blind user comes across a digital product that they can't use, that they don't always end up in lawsuits. In some cases, they have gone to the businesses, have written a letter or said to someone, I cannot access your digital product. So here's the page. Can you have someone to mark it up properly so that I can read your article or so that I can buy your product? Some companies take it upon themselves to make those changes. You have other companies who don't make any changes at all. And if they're the bigger companies or committees like the Olympic Committee, Domino's, the Beyonce website, those folks unfortunately got sued. So, and you also have to be mindful that code has changed throughout the years. So you know how every few years new words get added to the dictionary? Well, the same happens with HTML code. So there are tags that now exist for the sake of accessibility. And where, you know how they say, oh, we're Facebook 2.0, as opposed to when Facebook first came out. And most of us have Facebook accounts, so we're aware of all the changes. There are times when I come back to Facebook and it looks nothing like it looked the day before. Some of those changes that we see were probably implemented because of accessibility concerns. Not everything was just a design change just because someone felt like, oh, it would look better if this box was small and this blue was a little darker. Some of those changes have come across as a result of feedback from the disability community. I don't know if that answered the question, Corey. Oh, okay, I see. You said awesome. Okay. Right. So things change over time. Technology has changed over time, and HTML code has changed over time. There is an organization that is responsible for what they call deprecating, which is actually sending a notice out to the web design community to say, hey, stop using this tag. Or they'll say, hey, we want you all to start using this tag and this is what it does. We had a great discussion about the picture tag yesterday, right? Years ago, I never used the picture tag. No one ever mentioned it. I couldn't tell you if it was even around. I would bet money that the addition of the picture tag is something new. Even up to a year ago, the picture tag, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, but the picture tag, I don't remember that it was even used in the last cohort. I've never come across it. Have you?
I did not use it, no. So
Okay.
I'm not sure.
So that just goes to show you how quickly things change. And a great way of keeping up with what tags are being, that you're being encouraged not to use, and what tags are being pushed to the forefront for you to start using for the sake of making things easier, design sleeker, more functionality. The W3 school is like, that is my HTML Bible when it comes to figuring out what's happening with code. If you can actually go and you can click on some things there where it talks about how to create your HTML page, you you can click on a tag and it will tell you whether or not you should still be using that tag. So, all right, so in continuing to talk about what makes web pages difficult to read, you have some web pages that automatically refresh or reload after a certain period of time. This is usually done to update information on the page in a timely fashion. So if you think about it, this can be like a stock ticker, it could be a weather report. So when pages refresh automatically, JAWS, excuse me, not JAWS, but VoiceOver, it refreshes and then it moves the focus back to the beginning of the page. What if you were in the middle of reading something and you're a blind user and it does that? Every few minutes, it's taking you back to the beginning of the page, and that can become very, very annoying. So this is going to interrupt what you're doing. So, so page refreshes make reading web pages difficult to read, and we'll talk about how to deal with that. And the screen reader is also going to let you know that it's refreshing and jumping back to the beginning. Let's see what else here. Okay. We talked a little bit about skim reading, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So skim reading is powerful in that it allows you to read, search, and navigate through your content. When you're able to see, you can do this visually. When you're not able to see what's on the screen, you rely on your screen reader to help you with that. So, and skimming, we said if your page is marked up properly, you'll use VoiceOver with the rotor for skimming. So skimming allows you to get an overview of content, and you can search for paragraphs and sections and headings and things of that nature. All right, and we're also going to be talking about ARIA, A-R-I-A, ARIA, which stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And ARIA is what allows the, it's actually text, and it helps to describe changes on the screen to the screen reader. So you'll have on your page what's called live regions, and live regions are areas of your page that are updated frequently. So once again, you know, that concept of the stock ticker or even chat logs. So if you have a region where ARIA is implemented, so ARIA is a property value, and you can actually set that so that it's on or off, so that it will announce when there's a change. But if it's set to off, it's not going to keep making that announcement. So just think, if you're in the middle of reading something and every time something changes, it interrupts your reading, it can get to be very frustrating. But what it does is it'll enable you to hear items that change on the page without you having to lose your place and where you're currently reading. Okay, and I think I can continue. Let's see. So I'm just going to bring up this last slide and share my screen again. Am I currently sharing my screen? Can everyone see that or no? It says tomorrow discussion of ARIA. No, I
No,
don't
you're
think I'm sharing.
sharing you.
I'm sharing
Sharing you,
me.
which is wonderful, but we don't see anything else.
Okay, I'm about to share. Sorry about that. So tomorrow we're going to not only play around with voiceover, we're going to do a deeper dive into ARIA and live regions. We are actually going to create some accessible code, do a comparison of what it looks like when code isn't accessible, and then using that same code to make sure that it's accessible. And we'll also jump into some live testing. So I have given you a couple of links at the bottom of the page to so that you can get a basic introduction to ARIA. I'm actually going to click on the second link and you're free to click on it with me.
Dana, I'm sorry, but those don't seem to be hot links for me. So
They
if they could
don't?
go in the chat, that would be awesome.
Sure. Caitlin, can you take care of that?
I've been like putting a minimized browser underneath and typing the URL in.
I'm sorry.
No, we're sorry. It's just, I don't know. It's probably, me. I'm probably sending bad vibes to my MacBook. Anyway, thank you.
No problem. So let's take a look at ARIA. What is it? ARIA is shorthand for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and it's a set of attributes that you can add to your HTML elements that define ways to make your web content and applications accessible to users with disabilities who use assistive technology. So when accessibility issues cannot be managed with native HTML, ARIA can help bridge those gaps. So where does it come from? So ARIA, which is your Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. Formally it's known as WAI, ARIA, but you'll hear it just referred to as ARIA. And it's a technical specification published by the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, and the folks that are also responsible for my beloved W3 school. And this is the international community of developers, and they develop our web standards. So it initially had a working draft on September 15th of 2008. And it became a completed W3C recommendation in March of 2014. And if you want to see the published recommendation, you can feel free to click on that link, but I'm not going to do that now. So who is ARIA for? So one, it's not currently supported by all technologies, but support for it is definitely growing. So ARIA support is, it is supported through our screen readers, our assistive technology. So, and that's important because ARIA is what also gives meaning to the reading experience for someone who is blind. Let's see, what else can I find for you in here? All right, so let's talk about what ARIA can do. There are three main components used in ARIA. They are roles, states, and properties. Roles, states, and properties. When you talk about roles, roles are used to define a type of user interface. So here it gives you the example of role, and this role equals name. So once a role is set for a particular element, it does not change. And this right here, and we'll do a deeper dive into this. This is actually what you would put in your HTML code. And we'll talk about how a screen reader would interact with that. Okay, so moving on, we're not going to talk about every single row. Let's talk about states and properties. So states and properties can be applied to elements. They're used together to support ARIA rows existing on a page. So when we talk about a state, if you think of this, have you ever checked a checkbox? Well, that is the state of being checked. Have you ever unchecked a checkbox? That is a state. Checked or unchecked, selected or unselected. That's the easiest way to think of states, like a switch, on or off. So states can change on their own or with user interaction. And it usually happens with JavaScript. And properties rarely change once they're set. Okay, so there are 4 categories of states and properties. So there's drag and drop, live region, which we discussed already, relationship attributes and widget attributes. And it's not important that I'm not asking you to memorize this, because what happens is when you come across web pages or you create web pages, depending on what you're trying to build or what your customer wants, having an awareness of this, you can always go to a website such as the one that I'm on now, and you can figure out how to make those areas accessible. Even though I've been doing this for a while, because there have been so many changes with HTML code and CSS and the standard, I can't even pretend to know everything that's out there right now for making pages accessible. But what I'm doing is I'm giving you the equipment that's needed for you to be able to find ways of creating the type of accessibility that you would want for your consumers. There is no one size fit all. There are best practices, and when you go in, there are going to be things that that you have to do immediately. That you'll want to use your semantic tags as much as possible. That you want to keep the generic div down to a minimum if you can. You'll want to have your sections. You'll want to have all your buttons marked up properly so that when the reader comes across it, it is clearly telling the person it's a button. And see. You'll want to make sure that you don't skip around on your heading levels. And if a heading doesn't look the way that you want it to look, you can restyle it using the style sheet. You shouldn't use cheat methods like putting it inside of a paragraph tag and making it bold and then changing the size of it to because that doesn't hurt the visual user. But taking away the heading level, what you're doing is you're taking away the meaning of how your pages are structured. All right, so let's take a look at some of the resources that I put inside of Google Classrooms, because I know you'll probably want to play around with this a little bit tonight. So I'm in module 3. And let's see, mine starts at assignment number 10. All right, if you can go ahead and just open up assignment number 10. Let me know if you're not able to get access to this PDF file. I'm hoping that everyone will be able to open it. This is the actual document of what went to court when Beyonce was sued. Now, I didn't put this in here to punish you all. It's 27 pages. You don't have to read through the whole thing. But I said, you know, you all are really, really smart people. You may end up working on a website for a big name headliner or rock star or movie star. And this is just arming you with information as a web designer who has the potential to take on big name clients to know what the complaint was. What I'd like you to do is to skim through this, find a section that interests you. And in order to get your participation points for tomorrow, we're going to take the first 10 or 15 minutes in class. I'm going to go from student to student, and I want you to talk to me and talk to the class about what you thought was interesting within this document. And it doesn't matter if you use the same section that someone else used. You may have a different take on that same section. But I just want you to have an awareness of what's not in the news, what the issues are, you know, what the plaintiff is saying. And I've been to her website. Have any of you been to Beyonce.com? Okay. So, I mean, actually go to her website. Maybe she's resolved some of these issues. If you go to her site and you want to peek under the hood and look at the underlying code, or if you want to turn on Voiceover and actually try to find problems with it on your own, feel free to do that. I'd be interested to hear what you found. And you don't have to spend more than a few minutes on this. All right, so going back. So that's assignment number 10, which is to read through that document, at least some of it, and just find something that strikes you, you know, that you can bring back to class tomorrow and share with everyone else. Assignment number 11 is just another reading assignment. I want you to look over the keyboard chart to become familiar with Voiceover keyboard commands. And these keyboard commands actually take the place of using your mouse to navigate web pages. And then we'll go over using Voiceover in class on Thursday, which is tomorrow. So when you click on the link, you should be able to bring up the keyboard. And this is just a visual representation of what will happen when you use your Voiceover key in combination with one of these other keys. And I mentioned to you that my Voiceover key is caps lock, which you can see on the screen is in red. All right, next. So I have a resources list for you for module 3. So I'll start from the bottom and move up. Let me make my page a little bit larger. There's a wonderful website called the Czech University. I'm going to click on that link now. So the Czech University actually has online courses that teach you more about accessibility. If you want to do more of a deeper dive than what we're doing in the next 2 days, I would invite you to come to this website to get a more comprehensive look at accessibility for desktop computers. You can look at accessibility for Windows, also the Mac, and also for mobile devices. While we're here, let's just take a look at our VoiceOver keyboard shortcuts for the Mac. So when you navigate here, you can learn the basics, navigation, navigating data tables using the rotor, and additional resources. So I would recommend using this after class or whenever you have time. Just come here. You can do a review of what I talked about today and do your own deep dive into VoiceOver. And if you do anything with it tonight, when it's your turn to speak tomorrow, you can also let me and the rest of the class know about your experience with using VoiceOver. And let's see. I think that out of everything that I've showed you today, this this web page right here, I said the Czech University, it's Deck University. I'm sorry. I really can read. So let me just go back one. And if you've pulled up this website, I actually want you to pull up this page with me. It's under the section that says Mac, and it says enabling keyboard accessibility on a Mac. And I know that your keyboard structure is different from mine, but I happen to notice that some of my keyboard combinations were not working, and I had to enable the keyboard accessibility on my Mac. If some of your keystrokes are not working, you may have to go in and configure this area. And let me tell you, it took me months to find this. I'm giving you all a gift tonight. I'm giving this to you. So let's take a look at this. So it says, and this was the case for my laptop. You all have the newer MacBook Pros. This may not be the case with you, but I need you to check. So keyboard accessibility is not enabled by default on a Mac. Your accessibility and screen reader test results will be inaccurate if you do not enable keyboard accessibility in the following two places. Guess what? If you ever have a blind consumer come and tell you, your website is not accessible, this needs to be your Bible. I would print it out and I would tell the user before you make that final determination, do you have your keyboard accessibility enabled on your Mac, because it is not enabled by default. Okay, do not ever forget that I told you this. Mark this, put it in your favorites, and if you can get to a printer somewhere, print this up. I can tell you that even though I'm well-versed in accessibility, there were web pages that I thought were inaccessible because I did not know to do this first. All right, so the default keyboard access on a Mac is to allow users to tab only the form controls. When you enable system-wide keyboard accessibility, this allows you to be able to tab to links and other elements. That's very important. This is a part of the reading experience for a blind user. You need to enable the all controls setting in System Preferences, and then you go to Keyboard, System Preferences, Keyboard, Shortcuts, and then you select Full Keyboard Access, All Controls. And if you can do this, you will be in good shape to start playing around with Voiceover tonight. And it is 8:26. I'm going to end here because this is a great place to end class tonight. This is the very beginning of your journey to begin looking at websites that are already out there, learning how using your voiceover commands to begin to navigate as if you were someone who was visually impaired. I'm going to show you the basics of navigating. Tomorrow, we will begin to take a deeper dive into whether or not a web page is accessible. We'll do at least one, maybe two websites. And then I also said that if there's any code in GitHub that we can begin to take a look at as far as what you all will be using for your projects or capstone, we can take a look at that also. And you'll get your first live web accessibility test out the way, another notch in your belt. That's all, folks. I'll hang around for any questions. Other than that, you're dismissed for the night. You're welcome, Shah.
You're welcome. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Have fun playing around with Voiceover.
Dana,
Yes.
this is Latonia. I had just kind of a random question. I'm just curious what folks who rely on this technology, like what's the state of this technology in their perspective? Like, is it in its infancy? Is it, you know, pretty much where it's going to be? I'm just curious.
It's definitely not in its infancy. I happened to watch a video today of the head of a company that does a different screen reader. And he and his group of employees, he said that they make changes to their product just about every day, every other day. But they don't announce those changes every day. What they'll do is they'll do like a new release and they'll create a list of what they had to change in order to make sure that you could still use your keystroke combinations to access certain areas. So I'll give you an example. Twitter has changed over the years. Facebook has changed over the years. When the internet first started and screen readers first came onto the scene, there really was no social media. There was email. So when social media like Facebook and Twitter started up, it presented a new set of challenges for screen reader users. And so what happens is the makers of these products, they have partnerships with Mac, with Apple, with people who make different apps. And so they will either figure out ways to configure their app, their screen reader, to be able to access these different interfaces, the different apps, the different digital products. If they are not able to figure it out, they have to make a phone call to someone and say, you know, your project, your digital product is not accessible. If it were me and I created a digital product that the screen reader makers, if they could not figure out how to access it once I made a change, I would appreciate that phone call, because now I could go to my app, I could go to my digital product, right? Let's say, I'll give you a real world example. We had kiosks at the college that I worked at. Well, you come in, you have to be able to navigate this kiosk in order for customer service to be able to call you in order to register for classes. They also have these same kiosks in the DMV. These kiosks were not always accessible. Someone had to complain that they were accessible and changes had to be made. We didn't create the kiosk. The manufacturers had to figure out how to incorporate accessibility into their digital product. And when they did that, then we were able to use them on our campus. So it depends on the product. It depends on the user. But so in the case of a web page, I guess it just depends on what your content is and how it's meant to be used. So I would say that the best thing to keep in mind is you want the blind user to be able to have a similar or almost the same type of auditory experience that a sighted user would have. And you want them to be able to interact with those same areas that a sighted user would have. So for example, if you have a contact me form, if I start tabbing around in your form, am I going to know that you want my first name, my last name, my phone number? Are your form controls properly labeled so that when the screen reader looks at the code, it says first name field, text area, edit. When a blind user hears that, it knows that they're in a text field. And when the screen reader says edit, to them, that is the cue that they are able to type in that area. If it says drop down list select, that cues the blind person that they have to hit an up or down arrow to open up the list and begin navigating from the choices. If it goes to a checkbox, the screen reader will say, we're offering 5 ice cream flavors. Please select the ice cream flavor that you want. Item number 1, strawberry, checkbox unchecked. Item 2, vanilla, checkbox unchecked. Item 3, buttercream, checkbox unchecked. And then as a blind user, you have to think, well, how do I let LaTanya know, that I want the vanilla ice cream? Oh, so as a blind user, I've already been trained to interact. I know that I have to hit the space bar to check that checkbox. A sighted user is using their mouse. As a blind user, I don't know where that mouse is on the screen, but I know that the cursor focus, which is what you don't see, so it's called a virtual cursor. That virtual cursor lets the blind user know that they are at whatever flavor they want. It's telling them that the checkbox is unchecked. If they hit the space bar, it'll say vanilla ice cream, checkbox checked. If I change my mind and I want to uncheck it, all I do is hit the space bar again. If I want to jump to the next flavor, I hit the tab key to jump to the next flavor. So your job is not necessarily knowing how to navigate these web pages. If you mark them up, you're just really responsible for creating the accessibility. But because I know how to navigate as a blind person, I think it'd be very interesting for you all to see what the difficulties are. And why it was made law to begin with the ADA and Section 508 and so on.
My husband has a coworker, of course, everyone's working remote right now, but he had LASIK surgery a few years ago. It was not a big deal, except it went horribly wrong. So he now needs to use all of these things, assistive technologies and tools. And
Oh
they
my
had
goodness.
to get him.
Did he lose his vision? Or is he just low vision?
He is so low vision. I mean, light gets in and that's about it.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
So, but it's interesting that we're focusing on that because I might have a chat with him or something, learn some stuff from him, what he has learned. But it's just, you take things for granted till you're on the side where you're the one. I mean, even something as simple as going to a restaurant and there aren't enough high chairs for your child. I remember that being like a thing. And before I had a child, it was, you know, it's like, oh, what do you mean you can't do? Well, you can't do it. You can't see it. You can't, you know. So this is really good. And as you know, this is a passion of mine that I have wanted to pick up on from back in the day when, in the early days of assistive technology, when I, you know, was into it in grad school and everything. I'm really looking forward to just taking this somewhere, but we got to get through boot camp first. I did have a couple questions. I don't want to take anyone else's turn, but I had in the chat that I did want to ask you. So I'll just hang here until it's my turn.
Okay, LaTanya, did you have any other questions?
No, I just put a comment in the chat about why I asked a question, which kind of went to what Carolyn just said. But no, I'm all set. So everybody have a nice night. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, see everyone tomorrow.
I was just curious about something.
Sure.
We talked about with Christy the last 2 nights, we were talking about how you have to check things on different platforms and different web browsers and like a phone versus computer and stuff like that. And I was wondering, when you're testing your site for accessibility, is that something you would try to do on all different platforms, or once you have these markups in there, it would automatically work on all of them?
Once you have your markups in there and you're using the browser that is being advised to use with that product, it doesn't matter if you have them styled or not. The browser rendering is visual, and the blind users, they're not concerned with how it looks visually. So they just
But it would work the
wanna go
same on
through.
an Android phone or whatever. They have all the same features and it would go right through, you know.
So navigating on a phone is different. So, but if we're talking about like a Chrome browser versus an Edge browser or Safari and stuff like that, it should work. It will work the same because of the code, because of the HTML. Mhm.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
just curious. Thanks.
No problem. Yeah, and we didn't even touch on accessibility on phones. That's it's something different.
I was
trying
thinking
to
about
figure
that. Yep.
Yeah.
Someone will sue you because
So this is, so if you have a web application, which just means that you have your website, so when your website is responsive, so that when it goes down to cell phone size, it actually looks like an app.
Right.
So all of your HTML and stuff in there, it will still be accessible, but and I did see where you can use VoiceOver on your phone, but as far as how you're interacting with it on your phone,
Well, right. There's no tab key.
Exactly. So I'm not
put like a
versed.
peripheral keyboard on your cell phone, which kind of defeats the purpose of having.
Exactly. So if you're interested in that, I can find some information and drop it in resources, but I don't really get into that area too much.
That brings me to a
Yeah.
question too, that I just thought of, inspect. Can you do that on a phone? Or do you have to use, like we saw the other day, where you can see emulations of the different devices and what they do, like in Google Chrome, to see?
You can't use inspect on a phone, but you can use dev tools, like you said, and emulate those viewports. The other thing, like they have specific like programs that do that much better than like DevTools does. So there's one called Browser Stack, where it's a library of devices, operating systems, browsers, and things like that, where you can emulate a better idea of what actually is happening on like a real device. But yeah, there's no DevTools on.
You throw that in Slack?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not gonna.
It's not free. It's not free, but I think you can use some of it for free. I don't
Oh,
remember.
that's great. That's great. I didn't even know that. Hey, can I also tell you that I'm better able to navigate dev tools in Safari as opposed to Chrome?
Isn't that
And
interesting?
with your accessibility navigation?
Well, not as far as accessibility navigation, but just as far as the look and being able to find stuff. And yeah, I really like the rendering of the dev tools in Safari better than the ones in Chrome.
Interesting. That's another point too, and I don't know if anyone knows David Lankus. He used to be at SU. He and I would get in these conversations about assistive technology back in the day, and it wasn't important. And then lo and behold, it became important, and we were government sites, so we had to do it. But I talked about how, like as a cataloger, I want to make information accessible, and you find all these ways. So it's like, there are probably still people on Blackberries. There are probably still people running Windows 93 on an old HP machine. So I'd say, well, you know, if we're going to be accessible, and he said, you know, there's a point where you have to just cut it off. I mean, really, it serves them right for being an old technology, but seriously, how far back should we go if we're concerned about accessibility and a user that may have a dinosaur device?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, seriously, like how?
Oh, I know it's a serious question. So
I mean, I'm joking because you can get kind of ridiculous, like our old PC Junior, which wasn't web.
Can I tell you that if I didn't have to upgrade anything, I never would.
Yeah, but they break stuff, so
they break stuff, and newer technologies don't play nice with dinosaur computers
or dinosaur people.
Or dinosaur people. And the other thing is that you have to remember the older stuff have a lot more security vulnerabilities. I just tell people if there's any way that you can kind of come into the new ages with newer technology.
Although if you're on a Unix machine, it is much more secure than Windows, but that's a discussion for another day.
It is, and Unix is outside of my knowledge base.
I've used it, but I don't.
Yeah.
I'm mimicking what my husband says too. So, but seriously, like if you're trying to make sure it looks good in all these different browsers and different versions of browsers, is there a rule of thumb of like how far back to go? Like it would be up to your company, of course, but like let's say you were checking, I was going to say Godzilla,
Mozilla,
or what's I have Firefox. Sorry, I haven't used it. Like, would you go back to like version 1? Would you get?
So I don't know if this answers the question, but once again, if you're looking for rules of thumb as to what will render in those older browsers, like the W3 School does a good job of letting you know what's going to work and what doesn't work. And then they also have code that you can put into HTML5 that will allow your pages to render properly in older browsers.
So for the viewport, you can retrofit.
Yes, you can retrofit.
So even if your code is now, somehow an older browser will get it.
An older browser will get it. Yes.
Cool.
And you can W3 School, when you're looking at those element tags, it will tell you it will tell you what browsers and versions and things like that it's compatible with, and it will say if you need it to work on this browser, you need to make sure that this code is inserted into the HTML for it to render properly.
Yeah, I think I remember doing that a while ago before HTML5.
Okay.
And before it was called the viewport, but yeah, that's so anyway, it's sort of a joke, but also, I mean, seriously, how far back do you go? Because there might be some BlackBerry user that sues you, because you can't use their sign.
Well, the thing about it is, when it comes to the older technologies and older phones and things like that, if you are a user with a visual impairment, it does not serve you well to hang on to that old stuff for more than a few years, because what you're doing is you're locking yourself out of these new web experiences that keep coming along. I mean, if you remember
Yeah.
years ago,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and this is the most basic example that I can think of, remember how long it used to take to render video? And then these group of teenagers came along and they figured out how to make it so that we're able to run video on our computer so that it's not choppy. We can very
Right.
quickly upload and
Oh.
download multimedia files, right?
Yeah.
And so if you think about it, every time there are like major upgrades to systems, these assistive technology makers of the screen readers, what they're doing on their end is they're making sure that they can go in and they can have access to these different things. So when you have new code and new way of doing things, then the assistive technology makers, they have to tweak things on their end.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who is using an old technology, so for example, JAWS might be on a version 15, whereas 3 or 4 years ago, it might have been on a version 9. Well,
That's a big jump.
right,
If
exactly.
you haven't jumped.
Exactly. So a version 9 may only allow me to access MP3,
Right.
whereas the newer version is going to allow me to access MP4s.
Mhm.
What else? The new tags that are coming out,
Yep.
like picture and things of that
Yeah,
nature.
that's a
So,
great one. I
right.
love that. But also by the same token, this is a kind of a socioeconomic argument, you know, people who do have certain challenges, whatever they might be, in this case, we're speaking about visual, might not have the wherewithal to keep up with the technology. Although I know there's government that, my brother-in-law also works for Perkins in Watertown, Mass.
Mhm, mhm.
And so, you know, I kind of know a little bit about how the commission works on getting, you know, resources to
Yes.
the blind and stuff. So, but
Yep.
still, you know, that could be in the way, but that's a whole other thing. It looks like other people are gone. Or did they just shut off their cameras?
I think some shut off their cameras and some are
Okay.
gone. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to, and Caitlin did kind of a nice job of answering a couple of my questions, but one had to do with the capstone, if we were required to include accessibility features. I want to.
I think that would be great. And if there's anyone who wants to include the accessibility, I say, why not? I'm not pushing towards that at this point, but I am encouraging it, because if you are thinking about starting your own company or working with some type of larger company, you really can't ignore it these days. Either you try to face it head on and include some of it, even if it's just for 5 tags, like the image tag is
Oh, the
a
alt tag, I
huge
mean,
one.
that's
Yeah,
pretty,
yeah, alt
yeah,
tag for image.
yeah. Because what I want to do with my capstone has to do with dealing with people that have mental health issues.
Okay.
Another thing near and dear to my heart as a survivor. And sometimes people with those kinds of issues need accessibility considerations, which I need to learn more about, but I do know that there's things that like trigger certain people, or they, you know, whatever. And I don't want to get in over my head, obviously, but it would be nice if I could at least incorporate some and show that, you know, if I had a year to do this, I would, you know, do more. So, but it's not a requirement. I was just curious
Right.
about that.
Right. So if you're talking about someone who has, did you say some type of mental issue? Is that what you were
Mental health
saying?
issues, I
Mental
might
health
focus
issue.
on depression and anxiety,
Okay.
since I write the book.
Yeah.
But you know, I want to have things like a section where
Yeah.
they can have daily affirmations in a way they can
Right.
put stuff in there, and quotes, and then a page that has resources they can turn to, and
Mhm.
it's kind of like your daily, and there's a gratitude journal they could keep, you know, a
Right.
daily mental help yourself, you know, feel better kind of thing.
So those are definitely apps that help to deal with a mental health issue. That doesn't necessarily translate into a problem with reading or writing. Now, if the mental health issue was like ADD or ADHD, where there was
yeah.
some type of cognitive delay or reading focus, then there are definitely there are tools that we haven't discussed that are outside of the realm of visual impairments. So,
Right.
and there are tools that are out there that are very easy to use. Like with Voiceover, there is a bit of a learning curve because and we haven't talked about that. If you're a person who is blind, you don't see these directions. I've been able to give
Right.
you all guides to see these.
Yeah.
There's a lot of memory work that they have to do, and it becomes very tiring, very
Oh, yeah.
exhausting.
Or if
And
you've got a,
yeah, and it takes time. But if you're someone who has some type of other disability, but you're able to see, you actually go into a realm of different tools. So
yeah,
there are reading focused tools. There are apps that we call mindfulness apps
yes. Oh, yeah, I know.
that
Yeah.
have like different alarms. There
Mhm.
are things that where you can set it so if you start your homework, it can tell you when to take a break because you
Yep.
can sit there
Oh, yeah.
and the anxiety
be me.
builds and what happens is like you may be on a regimen where you know you're supposed to break at a certain time and eat or get
You
away
need the
from it,
structure.
but you push and push and push until you
Oh,
push
yeah.
yourself over the edge. You don't have the toolkit to make yourself break on your own.
Right.
So you probably
Coping
build up
skill.
some type of strategy with your
Yeah.
counselor or psychiatrist where
Yep.
they say, you know what, I want you to put this mindfulness app on your phone and it's going to tell you when to break,
Right.
when to come back and try again. It's going to tell you when to stop working for the evening. It's going to,
Right.
you know, it's a check-in with
You need
you.
someone to take you and plug and play you sometimes. Well, I
Yes.
also have Graves and I'm fine now, but when I was first diagnosed with it,
Mhm.
I couldn't process information. So
Okay.
it's like, that's still a case where even if you're reading it on the screen, or people with closed brain injuries,
Mhm.
or bipolar, or,
Right.
so I mean, I need to think about this carefully and, but I'm thinking if there is also a way to incorporate something,
So
not just to put it in there, but to help, that
right.
would be great. But anyway, I
So
wanted,
do you know about text help? It is text help. Hold on, I'm looking at it right now.
yeah.
So text help has a product called Read and Write.
Oh, I was thinking of something else. I'm sorry.
Okay, but when it comes to reading and attention and being able to digest information, study upon study has shown that people who have difficulty with reading and retaining information, when it is read to them, in addition to them being able to see information, that it's easier to retain and digest the information.
And to
So,
process.
right. So if you take a look, so this is actually free. The full version of the text help read and write does cost some money, but to get the little widget that attaches to your browser, that's free. You get basic reading functionality from it. I'm going to activate mine right now. And then I can click and drag across some text and hit this play button. Were you able to hear that?
Not really, but I know it's doing something.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I
yeah,
haven't included audio with my screen share, but what it's doing is it's reading. I can actually hear what's being
guiding you.
read. Yeah, it's highlighting as it's reading and it focuses on each word that's being read. I can slow this down. I can speed it up.
Change the voice.
I can change the voice.
Can it be musical? No, I'm not. Music is very powerful. I wanted to be a music therapist 100 years ago.
No, I
And
understand that music is powerful, but what do you mean? Can it sing to me while it's reading?
yeah,
No. No.
I mean, this is way beyond the capstone, but like if a user could say, I want it to be Beyonce, I don't follow Beyonce. I'm
Right.
but anyway, yeah, I will look at that. I have all these notes about my capstone that I started and I just added this to that. So definitely. And I do have a pretty good insight besides personally. I'm also a volunteer administrator for a Facebook support group for bipolar depression, suicide. So it's like I have a lot of people I can get ideas from and everything and a lot of resources. So I could populate this with some stuff already and then figure out a way that it could come in, they could do a search or something. I don't know yet, but it's more of an idea than I had 4 days ago. So.
All right, then.
Right.
Well, if you ever want any feedback, you can let me know.
Oh,
But yeah, I
definitely.
think we're done.
When we had our interview and you were talking about, your background and so forth, which was really awesome. And you mentioned assistive technology and this, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Because it has sat dormant for years. And it was something I started and it just kind of ended because other things came along. But it's something I'm passionate about. So
Yeah, back in 2002, when I started in assistive technology, it was a very small office in the corner of 804 University Ave on the 3rd floor. And they wanted the one small office just to handle everything: housing issues, architectural issues, complaints,
issues of all kinds.
transportation, access issues. They wanted us to handle closed captioning, remote and live captionists in the classroom. And it was a very big job for a small 5-person team. The director, myself as the accessibility specialist, and 3 disability services counselors. And now that team has more than doubled. They've hired graduate students to come and assist. There is a whole test taking center for students with disabilities. Housing now takes care of housing issues.
Well, yeah, I should.
Physical plant now takes care of structural issues. And let's see, you have housing, you have the physical plant. And yes, so the areas that we were fighting to say, instead of disability services handling this, your staff needs to be handling this, then they're doing an excellent job of it. Everything has been like siphoned off to the areas where they're a better fit.
Make that happen. It's like so cool to have been there. I think to be part of that, the birth.
It was a fight every day. And in addition, in addition to the pushback from the different departments, there was the student advocacy group that, was always a stone's throw away from filing a lawsuit for whatever reason. We had to, so there is so when you go to a corner and you're able to cross, you're able to see when the little traffic light comes on with the person on it, when it turns white, that you're able to cross the street. So we had a blind student at that time who, of course, could not see that. So we had to find someone who could come and install a cuckoo clock that would, at the same time when it changed and told the sighted users that they could cross, would tell the blind student that it was okay to cross the street. And I had to listen to that because my office was near the corner over by the ambulance service, right? I listened to that every day for at least a year, and it was so loud. It's not loud like that anymore. It's a more tolerable thing.
Yeah,
but it was
loud.
something. But it was something, and it kept the university from getting sued. It was something, which is what was needed.
Aren't traffic lights already, or did this come after that? They have some kind of pulses and sounds, and now they talk to you, which is really creepy. Like in Casanova, walk the walk, wait. I thought there was something.
Not in 2002 on the
See,
corner.
that doesn't seem
On the
like that
corner
long ago, but I guess it was.
Yeah,
That's when my son was born.
So this is what, 2021?
I think so.
And I'm talking about 2002, so that was 14
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess that's a long time. I'm still, I don't know. It doesn't seem, we were, my director used to say, we weren't on the cutting edge, we were on the bleeding edge, as the
Yes.
Center for Information and Technology at SU,
Yes.
but, the cutting edge, the bleeding edge, he called it, quickly becomes a has-been if you don't stay with it. So
Exactly.
it's
And
like,
you all are ahead of the game because you're actually being exposed to this now. I tell you, people who come out of school who don't deal with making their digital products accessible are actually behind the 8 ball. If you have an awareness of it and you have a clue of what to do, um, it really does it really does prevent a lot of problems in the long run. And so that's why I was so passionate about bringing it to you all this year. I'm like, you
Oh,
know what, let me.
and I just got another idea.
Okay.
My site could be made accessible to people who are visually impaired, who also need a mental health support app.
Mhm. I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Well, you can't
Seriously.
see the site if you can't see the site. So if someone
Exactly.
who's blind and is suffering from depression and needs, a little extra support in
Mhm.
addition to all the other support, if they could navigate what they can't see.
Right. Okay. I
I
understand
don't
what
know.
you're
I don't want to
saying.
get carried away. But
Right, right. I
But
can
anyway.
tell you that what usually happens on a college campus is if there's anyone who is having trouble with access, there's the whole disability services office set up.
Mhm.
Each student that has identified as having a disability is assigned to a counselor.
Yep.
And so on a college campus, it's the counselor who helps to work through the emotions of anyone feeling discriminated against because they didn't have access. And then they would work with someone like myself who can, chop up a book or a PDF or a website and make sure that it's accessible in a relatively short amount of time. Now, I said websites only because I know how to test a website. Like on the university, I'm not actually one of the web masters. So I didn't want you to go away thinking, oh, Dana can go in and make the university website accessible. I could do that, but that wasn't a part of my job. My job at that point would be I stay on the accessibility side for the textbooks and the PDFs for students who've identified with disability services. In the past, that probably would have fallen on my lap because it did at OCC. But what happened is the IT department has they have access to like a whole room full of staff people who know how to make the websites and the PDFs accessible.
Mhm.
And so leaving Syracuse University all them years and then coming back to work part-time 10 years later to see that had happened, that the
Yeah.
IT department was actually handling that.
Mm.
I mean, I was smiling from ear to ear. Syracuse University really has done an excellent job
They're
of
primo.
making, yes, they are. They have a great model of how the
Oh.
entire university supports students with a wide range of disabilities.
Definitely. And they've stepped up to the new things that have come up as needing support as they've gone along, as our culture has talked about things we never talked about before and just really trying to
Yeah.
address. And of course, I'm from the School of Information Studies, alum and employee, and that's another awesome place that's working with other departments and, technology wise. And in fact, when I was watching the capstone presentations, there was a woman who had been a professor there, and I guess she had Lyme disease and the different, the story. Anyway, but she was talking about how there were students from the iSchool. It wasn't the iSchool then, but students from the iSchool would come to her English department because, of course, they were not English as a first language, maybe, and they needed help
Right.
writing things and so forth. But anyway, this is great. You're wonderful.
I'm just stopping the share.
No, that's great. Yeah, well, yeah, I wasn't gonna say anything. I didn't want to be rude. I could still see you
No.
in your little window.
Yeah, no, we're the last of the Mohicans
Yeah, I
here.
know, and I didn't mean to monopolize your time or anything. It's just.
Well,
it's
class
on-
is over and no one else had a question,
Yeah,
so you're
yeah.
fine to talk
But
now.
it's hitting on something I'm passionate about, which is the whole point.
Mhm.
You know, I was coming up with other ideas, like some kind of a Sudoku solver, and I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I would need Python or, but this is, you know, I walk the walk. I know how to talk the talk, and I have been with other people in various situations who are struggling, and I work as a volunteer administrator for this Facebook group, you know, helping people, and sometimes it gets very serious, and we have to like pursue support measures and, you know.
Can I just say one thing
Know
to
what they
you?
need.
Because, yeah, let me just say one thing to you. Just, you know, being someone who's worked with people with disabilities who have had a number of, you know, issues that go along with that, dealing with anxiety and depression.
Mhm.
And it's nice to be able to lend yourself to other people in their issues, but make sure that you take care of Carolyn.
Oh, yeah.
This is, and I say that to say that you see how quickly this boot camp moves along.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'm behind.
we're doing the fluffy stuff with you guys now. It the tougher stuff is coming.
You're kidding. I thought you started
you
off with
already
the tough stuff to see who would just, you know, fall like flies or whatever, and then.
you
No.
haven't even touched JavaScript. Your face will be in code
I-
every day.
It's cool. I can deal with it.
Okay.
I just still am a little behind on some other things, but you know, I think when I start applying these things is when I'll really go back and go, now, how did we do that again? Because I probably forget anyway. So, I mean, it all comes together. I'm not worried.
It does come together.
And I have a really great support system. Besides,
That's
I mean,
good.
the boot camp is a major support system. I mean,
That's
the career
we
coach,
we
you know,
are.
but I also have in place. I mean, that's how it is.
That's good. That's
And-
good to know. And that's important.
Mhm, it is,
So I'm glad to know that.
but I need to help others. I can't help it.
No, and I'm not saying don't help others
No,
because
I know.
that's human nature. What I'm saying is don't be so intent on helping others that you forget about your own needs, because this is a different element in your life. And I'm just reiterating what we said during opening. Don't underestimate how tough it can be, and just make sure that you keep the bricks to your own area solid, because sometimes we as helpers, because I also have a helper spirit, how many times do we forget to help ourselves and kind of take a break, and
Yeah,
then
you're
we
not
end up being
supposed
and
to.
then we
It's
be
like the
overwhelmed.
old, you know, it's selfish or whatever, which is nonsense.
Mhm.
And also I'm very empathetic.
Okay.
And
Yes.
years ago, I thought, oh, I'm gonna become a clinical psychologist or whatever. But I realized it would last about a week, because at the
Oh
time I
God.
was so empathetic, I would have really taken